Welcome to Language, Mindful Utilization of Patterns, Part 3. At the end of Part 2, we suggested these ones are fascinating. From a meta-model perspective, they are intriguing because they point to the way people connect things and make up rules and utilize their beliefs. And it's not necessarily always said on the surface, but these kinds of linguistic distinctions, when we detect them in the meta-model, are useful for really helping get to the seat of some profound problems that people can create for themselves. And of course, from the Milton model perspective, we can utilize them to help them investigate whether certain ways of thinking could enrich their lives and their model of the world. So let's look at the first set of the distortions. Someone says something in the business context like, "The new economy has broken the debt cycle." What we don't know here is who is saying this, or where was this written, or where does this culturally held rule or belief come from. So it's a lost performative. We can ask, who says, or on what evidence? But how could we use something like this to help someone? Well, here's a possible example. Confusion can be a good thing. A person's conscious mind might well ask, who says? But we're suggesting to the unconscious. Did you realize that there is a different way to experience confusion? In what way could you use confusion to help achieve some outcome? And in a learning context, confusion can be a signal of a transition between not knowing and knowing. Our next group, someone says, "His shouting made me terrified." What we have here is someone saying that a person's actions, or written words even, made them feel, caused them to feel in a certain way. This is an example of a cause-effect. We might well ask, in what way did his shouting terrify you? When he shouted, how is it that you reacted with terror? But of course, not all cause-effects in language are necessarily bad. They can be used, for example, like this. Applying discipline to your learning will make you more aware on many levels. And we're suggesting to the unconscious, what is your version of discipline and how can you apply it? Of what would you like to be more aware, and what would that be like? Begin imagining ways that your applying discipline might help you become more aware. Next group. Someone says, in the business context, for example, "He wears excellent suits. He must be a great manager." So here we have an observed behaviour which somebody then is using to suggest that it indicates something about the quality of the person or about a state of mind or body. It's a complex equivalent. We might well ask questions like this. Have you ever met someone with great clothes who was not a great manager? Or is it possible to be a great manager even though you don't have expensive clothes? One would hope the answer is yes. Are your skills intrinsically linked to the clothes you wear? And now, of course, we wonder how could we utilize this complex equivalent to ask somebody's unconscious to investigate richer ways of connecting things. For example, willingness to undertake challenging, learning tasks means you're engaging in who you can become. Here we're suggesting to the unconscious, what would you consider a challenging learning task? How could you be willing to undertake such a task? Who do you want to become anyway? What is it like to engage in creating your future self? They're just some of the directions along which the unconscious might think in response to our suggestion. And the final form of distortion, you may well be able to imagine, is given by an example such as this. I know what my colleagues think of me. Now clearly this person has supernormal powers of mind reading. Of course, obvious questions for this are, how specifically? Or on what evidence? Or have they explicitly told you? But of course, as you can imagine, this can be used quite well from the other perspective. I know you're ready to change certain beliefs. And in something like this, we're suggesting to the unconscious, what beliefs could you change? How would you know that you are ready and willing to change these particular beliefs? What are your internal and congruent signals of being ready to change beliefs? Beyond the distortions, we have presuppositions in language, known as linguistic presuppositions. It's always worth remembering what presuppositions underlie a sentence. If someone says to you, I drove here today, you know that has to be true that they have some ability to drive, that they started the day somewhere else, and that they had access to some form of vehicle. Those three presuppositions have to be true for the sentence to be true. That's not a problematic set of presuppositions, but presuppositions in language can become problematic when somebody says something like, I know tomorrow is going to be a dreadful day. So they're presupposing that there are going to be things happening that they will interpret as being dreadful. And they've already set up a quality of day, potentially, for themselves. There's far more than this that we could go on with, and that will be the subject of subsequent presentations. Things like looking at some of the devices we use in delivering Milton model, and some additional linguistic patterns such as the more, tag questions, ambiguity patterns, phonological, syntactic, scope and punctuation, behavioural presuppositions and conversational postulates, negative commands, embedded questions and embedded commands. And then of course there's the whole subject of metaphor, both deep metaphor and shallow metaphor. But for now, that concludes part 3 of this series. Thank you for listening.